Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. I hope you had a good festive period and are now refreshed enough to sit at home catching up on YouTube videos, including mine. We are moving on to part 4 of the Every Ferrari Driver Rated list, so make sure you go back and watch parts 1, 2 and 3 before this one. I've even made this easier for you by putting them in a playlist. Aren't I a kind fella? So check that out, subscribe to the channel. Still want to see some predictions for the top drivers? Leave them below. And with that, let's begin.
Welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport.
Number 30, Peter Collins. An excellent driver who, again, like so many of the drivers from the 1950s, died far too young, but he had a lot of success with Ferrari outside of Formula 1 and even a second place at Le Mans in an Aston Martin. But after having little success in Formula 1 with Alta, Van Wall and Maserati, it was a move to Ferrari in 1956 that made his career, as short as it was. He won 3 races in just 2.5 years and finished 3rd in the championship in 1956. He took 2 wins in a row in Belgium and France in the Lancia Ferrari D50, as well as several shared podium drives. He had a couple of podiums in 1957 but struggled compared to teammates Mike Hawthorn and Luigi Musso. Peter Collins, as mentioned previously, was a good friend of Hawthorn's and would often share prize money with him. But the pair kept Luigi Musso out and the rivalry often pushed them to take risks, a leading factor in Luigi Musso's death. Peter Collins himself would be killed in 1958 after taking a win at the British Grand Prix. Collins would be killed chasing Tony Brooks' Van Wall in Germany. Number 29, Giuseppe Nino Farina. The first driver to ever win a Formula 1 race and the first ever champion in Formula 1, winning for Alfa Romeo in 1950. Giuseppe Nino Farina wrote himself into history with Alfa Romeo, but it was after his time with Alfa was up that he joined Ferrari. He only had 2 full seasons with Ferrari, and despite not winning a race in 1952, 4 second places led to second in the championship behind teammate Alberto Ascari. In 1953 he would take his only win with Ferrari at Germany, but 3 more second places led to 3rd in the championship behind Ascari and Fangio, which isn't a bad result considering the incredible talents of the pair. Farina was definitely up there in quality with his counterparts, but he retired from full-time Formula 1, only taking selective drives in 1954 and 1955, taking a couple of shared podiums and points finishes. Number 28, Lorenzo Bandini. An incredibly talented Italian driver who Ferrari took their time in giving a full-time drive despite having sports car success with the team, winning at Le Mans in 1963 with Ludovico Scarfiotti in a Ferrari 250p, 16 laps clear of second place in a race that Ferrari filled the top 6. In Formula 1, Bandini debuted in 1961 with Scuderia Sentra Sud in a Maserati Cooper, but didn't score points before getting a podium on his Ferrari debut in Monaco in 1962. He'd only have 2 more drives that season, but didn't score points before Ferrari decided he was only going to race in sports car races for the team. But Bandini went back to Sentra Sud in Formula 1, but points in Britain meant Ferrari grabbed him back for the rest of the year, scoring a couple more points finishes. 1964 was his best year, taking his first ever win at the first ever Austrian Grand Prix, as well as a couple of podiums leading to 4th in the championship. He'd only get 1 second place in 1965 and a couple of podiums in 1966, before sadly being killed at the Monaco Grand Prix in 1967, an accident that saw hay bales banned from racetracks. Not that they ever had any business near racetracks anyway, just shows how crazy dangerous motor racing used to be. Number 27, Jose Froilan Gonzalez. The Argentinian who took Ferrari's first ever win in Formula 1 had 2 non-finishes in 1950 with the Scuderia Achilles Vasi team in a Maserati, and also raced a self-entered Talbot at the first race in 1951, before joining Ferrari later that year and winning the British Grand Prix. Also taking 3 other podium finishes in a year with only 8 races, including the Indy 500, this led to 3rd in the championship behind Fangio and Ascari. He'd leave Ferrari for Maserati in 1952 and 1953, taking several podiums before returning to the Scuderia in 1954, winning a 2nd British Grand Prix, along with a few other podiums and a 2nd in the championship, beaten once again by compatriot Juan Manuel Fangio, although by some way. He would only enter the Argentine Grand Prix in 1955, finishing second in a shared drive, as well as 2 final drives, both in Argentina. 1957 he'd share a 5th place, before returning in 1960 only managing 10th. Another legend from the early days, he also won the 1954 Le Mans race with Maurice Trintignant. 26. Michele Alboreto. The hugely underrated Italian, hints at a future video there, Alboreto had already won 2 races for Tyrrell before joining Ferrari in 1984. In his 14-long-year career, he'd spent 5 with Ferrari, but the first 2 were the best. He'd win his 3rd race for Ferrari at Spa, but a long list of retirements mid-season ruined his title hopes, despite podiums in Austria, Italy and the European Grand Prix. He finished 4th, which wasn't bad, but 1985 was a great season for Alboreto. 2 wins at Canada and Germany, along with 6 other podiums, led to a 2nd place in the championship, just 20 points behind Alain Prost in the McLaren, with Ferrari just 8 points behind McLaren in the Constructors. Poor reliability wrecked the rest of his time at Ferrari, with only 1 podium in 1986 but 9 retirements, leading to only 9th in the championship. He would get 3 podiums in 1987, but 12 retirements, and only 1 other points finish led to 7th, before a better 1988 with a few podiums but more points finishes leading to 5th. He'd leave Ferrari and see out his career with Tyrrell, LaRousse, Footwork, BMS Scuderia and Minardi, taking a final point in Monaco with Minardi in 1994. Number 25, Nigel Mansell. A world champion later in his career, but the incredibly talented Mansell had been the last driver personally selected by old man Ferrari himself. He chose to drive for Ferrari at a bad time though. 1989 was a year of development with a new semi-automatic gearbox in the Ferrari. There was a lot of frustration and reliability issues, but Nigel Mansell surprised everyone by winning his Ferrari debut at Brazil, followed by 4 retirements and a disqualification in Canada for starting the race too early. A mix-up in the pit lane meant Mansell got out before the safety car came round and picked up the field after an aborted start due to Berger stalling on the grid. He had a gold patch of 5 podiums, including a win in Hungary, but followed this with more retirements, a disqualification in Portugal for reversing in the pit lane, and a race ban. Overall, he finished 4th, but the signing of Alain Prost in 1990 meant that Nigel Mansell was no longer the lead driver for the team. He'd take a win in Portugal and a few podiums, but it was another tough year with many retirements and only a 5th in the championship. Mansell was going to retire at this point, but Frank Williams came in with an offer, and a couple of years later Mansell would be champion. Number 24, Eddie Irvine. The original 2nd driver for Ferrari, teammate to Michael Schumacher, meaning he was always going to play second fiddle in the Ferrari pecking order, but Eddie Irvine was brought in after a few decent years with Jordan and partnered with German machine for 1996. It was a rough year for Irvine. Despite a podium on his debut, it was a year of retirements and being a long way off Schumacher, only 4 points finishes leading to a 10th in the championship. He'd do better in 1997, getting 5 podiums and rising up the grid, but he was still a long way off Schumacher even though the latter was disqualified from the championship. Eddie Irvine improved further in 1998 to support Michael Schumacher's unsuccessful campaign for the title, but Eddie Irvine finished 4th in the championship with 8 podiums, and not too far behind David Coulthard in 3rd. It was 1999 where Eddie Irvine had to step up. He took his first ever win in Australia, but still looked to be playing a supporting role before Michael Schumacher broke his legs at Silverstone and Irvine was thrust into the limelight as Ferrari's best hope with the help of Mika Salo. He'd take 3 more wins at Austria, Germany and Malaysia, but would miss out on the championship by just 2 points and leave Ferrari at the end of the year, seeing out his career with 3 uneventful years at Jaguar, scoring only a couple of podiums but not much else. Number 23, Clay Regazzoni. Made his Formula 1 debut for Ferrari in 1970, sharing the drive with young Italian Ignazio Giunti, but Regazzoni was the pick of the two and would take a win at the Italian Grand Prix, as well as 2nd places in Austria, Canada and Mexico. Despite racing in only half the season, Regazzoni would take an impressive 3rd place behind posthumous champion Jochen Rindt and team leader Jackie Ickx. He'd race full-time for Ferrari in 1971, but the season wasn't as kind, with a few 3rd places and a lot of DNFs. And 1972 was not much better, with 3rd in Spain and 2nd in Germany. He'd be offered a huge wad of cash from BARM to race for the team in 1973 alongside good friend Niki Lauda, but it was a terrible year with Clay Regazzoni only scoring 2 points and finishing 17th in the championship. He returned to Ferrari for 1974 and brought with him Niki Lauda, and a lot of success for Ferrari. A single win in Germany for Regazzoni, along with a few podiums, meant he finished second in the championship behind Lauda. But 1975 was not quite as good. Despite a win in Italy, Regazzoni only finished 5th in the championship, which he matched in his final Ferrari year in 1976, with another win in America, meaning he ended his Ferrari career with 4 wins, and at the time was the driver who entered the most races in Formula 1 for Ferrari. He ended his career with Ensign, Shadow and Williams, leaving Formula 1 behind in 1980 after a crash at Long Beach left him paralysed, and Regazzoni spent the rest of his life fighting for the rights of disabled people and paved the way for others after him to compete in high-level motorsport. 22. Carlos Reuterman. The Argentine came to Ferrari after already winning 4 Grand Prix with Brabham and finishing 3rd in the championship in 1975, but 1976 was a bad year for Brabham and Reuterman left to replace Lauda at Ferrari. But Niki Lauda recovered from his fiery accident far quicker than anyone expected, so Reuterman only made 1 appearance in a 3rd Ferrari at Monza, out-qualifying Clay Regazzoni but only finishing 9th. He joined the team full-time in 1977 but didn't get on with Niki Lauda as well as Clay Regazzoni had. He'd take his first win in Brazil with 5 other podiums, being good enough for 4th. But he had a much better year in 1978, winning 4 races and finishing 3rd in the championship behind Mario Andretti and the sadly deceased Ronnie Peterson. He did beat former teammate Lauda, who was now at Brabham, but Carlos Reuterman left Ferrari from 1979 to join Lotus before having good success at Williams in 1980 and 1981 and is now a politician in Argentina. 21. Rene Arnoux. Rene Arnoux was another driver who had experienced Grand Prix success before heading to Ferrari, having taken 4 wins for Renault. He joined Ferrari in 1983, replacing the talented but sadly too injured to race Didier Peroni. In fact, 1983 was the year Ferrari basically had to start over after losing 2 very talented drivers in Gilles Villeneuve and Didier Peroni. Rene Arnoux did an admirable job for the team. The season started off slow with a couple of podiums in his first 7 races, before a win at Canada, followed by 2 more in Germany and Austria, as well as a couple of second places, leading to a 3rd place in the championship, only 10 points behind Nelson Piquet and Alain Prost. This was as good as it ever got for Arnoux. 1984 saw a lot of points finishes but only a few podiums and 6th overall, before Rene Arnoux had one last race at the start of 1985 before being replaced by Stefan Johansson. Strangely, it is not known why he was replaced. There are rumours, from a falling out with Enzo Ferrari, to poor fitness and hiding a severe knee injury, to the craziest being a drug addiction or general drug use. I doubt we will ever know the real reason, and Rene Arnoux saw out the rest of his career struggling with Ligier. Number 20. Alain Prost. The Professor is one of the greatest of all time, but his time at Ferrari was often a struggle and ended as a bit of a farce. Alain Prost won the 1989 Drivers' Championship with McLaren, so it was a big signing for Ferrari, and it all looked good for the Scuderia, with Prost partnering Nigel Mansell. They had 2 of the best drivers in the world. Alain Prost managed 5 wins but finished 2nd in the championship behind old rival Ayrton Senna, and Ferrari's form took a nosedive thereafter. 1991 was awful for Prost. He managed a 2nd place at the first race, but couldn't keep pace with the McLarens and Williams teams, and was sacked before the last race for publicly criticising the team. Number 19. Charles Leclerc. It's strange putting someone so young and currently racing for Ferrari so high on this list, but I think it is a sign of Charles Leclerc's talents, and he deserves his place above the likes of Alain Prost, Nigel Mansell and Nino Farina. It's also strange considering how bad Ferrari have been since Charles Leclerc signed for them, but he is a driver doing his best to persevere at Ferrari, and he is an exciting prospect for the future. And it'll be interesting to look back at this list when his time with Ferrari is done and see where I'll place him then. Signing in 2019, he took 2 wins in his first year with Ferrari and finished a credible 4th. Although he had a couple of clashes with Sebastian Vettel, which stained his record slightly, 2020 was an awful year with Ferrari. They were way off the pace and it was almost always Charles Leclerc that was the team's leading light, with Sebastian Vettel usually spinning to the back of the grid. Leclerc scored a couple of podiums and scored regular points for 8th overall, but the future is only going to get better. Number 18. Felipe Massa. Another of the Ferrari second driver brigade, Felipe Massa was with the Scuderia for a long old time, 8 long years. When he joined in 2006, he was partnering Michael Schumacher and took his first wins at Turkey and Brazil, which was good enough for 3rd in the championship behind Alonso and teammate Schumacher. Kimi Räikkönen replaced Schumacher for 2007 and won the championship, But Felipe Massa took 3 wins as well and finished 4th. 2008 was the best year for Felipe Massa and somehow almost the worst also. He thought he was champion for like 30 seconds before Hamilton dashed those dreams, but 2008 Massa beat his teammate and won 6 races, including his 3rd Turkish Grand Prix in a row. This was the last time Felipe Massa won a race. He only raced in half of 2009 before a horrifying eye injury at practice in Hungary after being struck by a piece of Barrichello's car saw him out for the rest of the year. He returned in 2010, now partnering Fernando Alonso, but Massa started to drop further down the grid. A few podiums was only good enough for 6th overall. 2011 saw points finishes at every round bar 4 but no podiums, and another 6th. 7th in 2012 and 8th in 2013. This was enough and Ferrari replaced him with Kimi Räikkönen. Massa saw out his career with Williams and moved to Formula E. Number 17, Wolfgang von Trips. Wolfgang von Trips sadly seemed to be hitting his peak when he was killed in an accident in 1961. He was meant to debut for Ferrari at the Italian Grand Prix in 1956, but a crash in practice meant he couldn't enter the race. He got his chance in 1957, but only in 3 races, sharing a drive in Argentina, retiring in Monaco, and getting on the podium in Italy. He'd enter more races in 1958, getting another podium in Germany, as well as a few points finishes. For a single race for Porsche in 1959, along with a single race for Ferrari but no points. He raced the majority of the 1960 season with Ferrari, he scored points regularly but didn't challenge for podiums, and it was 1961 when he came into his own. Wins in the Dutch and British Grand Prix led to Wolfgang von Trips leading the championship ahead of teammate Phil Hill, but a clash with Jim Clark at the Italian Grand Prix killed Wolfgang von Trips as well as 15 spectators. If he hadn't been killed, Wolfgang may have been champion, but sadly we will never know. Number 16, Didier Peroni. Another great driver who should have been champion, but tragedy meant it never happened. Didier Peroni was severely injured in 1982, and it was an awful year, with Ferrari already losing Gilles Villeneuve to an accident. Peroni began his Formula 1 career with Tyrrell and was a decent driver, scoring a couple of podiums, but made a name for himself at Ligier in 1980, with a win in Belgium and a 5th in the championship. He joined Ferrari for 1981, but it was a poor year for Ferrari, with Peroni only managing 13th in the championship with a few points finishes. Villeneuve only managed 7th and Ferrari were 5th in the Constructors. He took his first win at the contentious Imola Grand Prix in 1982. He overtook Gilles Villeneuve, who thought there was an agreement not to pass. Gilles apparently refused to speak to Didier Peroni ever again, which turned out to be true after he was killed in Zolder in a massive crash. Peroni continued on, winning the Dutch Grand Prix and going into the German Grand Prix with a healthy 9-point lead in the championship, but he crashed into Alain Prost in the rain and severely fractured both his legs. He'd never race again, and despite missing 4 races in 1982, only lost the championship by 5 points. Surely he would have been champion. So that was part 4 of the list. We have broken into the top 20 drivers and there aren't many more to go. So without looking it up, leave your guesses for who is left and put them in the order you think they'll end up. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Plenty still to come as 2021 kicks off. Leave a comment, share the video, leave a like. Have a happy new year. Thank you for watching and have a good one.